I'm really excited to introduce our next speaker. Our next speaker is Marty Reames, who's going to tell us about her experience as a subject of a cave rescue. Marty Reames has been caving for 27 years. Her caving journey has included caves throughout the United States, primarily in her home state of Colorado. She has worked on many caving projects from restoration to exploration and organized several events for the National Speleological Society, from local trainings to national conventions. She was the director of the Colorado Cave Rescue Network from 2007 to 2019. She currently volunteers as the NCRC Scholarship Chair, the NCRC Liaison, and as an instructor for the NCRC. Since her caving accident in 2005, she is grateful to be able to help teach others about cave rescue and pay it forward in thanks to those who have helped her. Everyone, please join me in welcoming Marty.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for that wonderful introduction. It's good to be here tonight, and I'm grateful that I can be here to share my story in hopes that it will inspire some of you to gain more knowledge of cave rescue training, to be more prepared for when you may be able to not only help yourself, your fellow cavers, but perhaps a stranger in need that you happen to find on the mountain. So without further ado, here is the account of my accident at Spanish Cave in August 2005. It was the annual grotto trip up to Marble Mountain led by Jim Wilson. We had 24 cavers from the grotto on the trip. The trip consisted of a 4-day backpack trip, 1 day to hike in, 2 days of caving, and 1 day to hike out. We were going into a wilderness area. There's no motorized vehicles there. Our cave camp to get there, it was a 3-mile hike, over 2,000 feet elevation gain. At elevation, we're starting around 9,000 feet elevation, going up to over 11. There's no trail to speak of, a little bit at the beginning going up a ridge line, and then it's bushwhacking, sometimes over obstacles of deadfall waist high, while you're carrying anywhere from a 50 to 60 pound pack. We ended up at our camp just below timberline in a high alpine environment. So oxygen's a little more challenging up there, exhaustion sets in a little sooner, and snow is very possible year round. Spanish Cave itself is a bit higher in the mountain. It is 34 degrees Fahrenheit year round, very damp conditions. There is snow and ice year round. In fact, even at one of the entrances, sometimes it's plugged with snow. The first several years cavers went in there, they walked right across the snow plug, not realizing they were going over a 120-foot pit straight below them. The cave is very vertical. Several reps are required to go throughout various passages of it, as well as a lot of technical climbing knowledge. This is not a beginner or novice cave. If you are interested in Spanish Cave, I highly recommend that you go with someone who knows the cave very well. If caves were rated like ski slopes, I would consider this a double diamond extreme expert terrain only cave. So on day 3 of our cave trip, I've had a great day backpacking in on the first day, wonderful day caving in the cave on day 2. On the 3rd day, I was on a trip with 7 other cavers. So we were going to go in one entrance and explore part of the cave. On the left side of the screen here, I've included a bit of a vertical orientation, what we call in caving a profile map, to show you the vertical terrain of it, where we entered the top through a tight squeeze area, went down through some passage into an area that we needed rope to rappel further down into. This is a very accident-prone location. Other cavers have had to be rescued here in this area in the past. When I got to the top of the area where it belled out, my buddy and I were the last 2 in our group. And all of a sudden he said something didn't feel right. He was having problems with his light. His water bottle had started leaking. He was already shaking and cold. He wasn't feeling well. And very uncharacteristically, he just kind of said, "I'm leaving," and turned around and left. Now, I really wanted to see more of the cave. I was so excited to be up there. This is a cave I'd been wanting to go explore for years. And, you know, cave's going to be there another day. I was concerned about my friend. So I yelled ahead to those a little further down the passage from my group. I said, "Hey, my buddy's turned around. I'm going to go with him. We'll meet you back at camp. We'll do this another day." So I turned around to go catch up with him. As we were heading out back towards the entrance, in a tight squeeze area right before popping out the top, I caught up to him. I said, "Let me go first. I got into that passage, and little did I know, since it was my first time going through it that day, that my body only fit in one orientation. I was reversed exactly 180 degrees. As I was squeezing up, got my chest wedged into it, the doctor's best guess is my foot was one way, my knee was the other. I pushed down, heard this loud pop, and excruciating pain just traversed through my body. My buddy, who was below me on the ledge, thought I was falling, even though if I had fallen, I probably would have already gone past and down the ledge about 30 feet, grabbed my foot, twisted my knee, slammed it into a ledge, which then created another pop, more excruciating pain, and I started screaming at him. I don't remember exactly what came out of my mouth, but I'm pretty sure there was some colorful language as well as yelling at him not to touch my leg. I was in tremendous pain, more than I've been in my life. Thankfully, since my upper body was wedged, I didn't fall. But sitting there scrambling, trying to get out, anytime I went to use my left leg, shooting pain went up my spine and I became paralyzed from the waist down. I could not use my legs. I spent about an hour flailing in this location, trying to get out, trying to get to the entrance that was not that far away, just slightly within sight. During that flailing process, I got my right boot of my good leg wedged in a crack. I recall from a cave rescue seminar I had heard of that a friend attended said that sometimes when a patient is stuck in a tight area, if you remove an article of clothing, it can help them become untrapped. So I yelled down to my buddy and I said, my right leg now is trapped. Can you take off my boot? He was able to get up to my boot, undo it, thus freeing my right leg. At that point, I was so exhausted. I asked him to help guide my body down to the ledge and asked him to go out for help. He debated a little bit. He wanted to crawl up and see if he could pull me up. We both weighed about the same weight. I did not feel comfortable with that suggestion whatsoever, because if he was ahead of me and I got stuck there again, there's no way I could get safely back to this ledge below. So very reluctantly, he left for help. Thus my wait began. Sitting on this ledge in the dark. Within 5 minutes, my headlamp went out. Pulled the light out of my pack. It went out. Pulled another light out of my pack. It failed. Pulled my fourth light out of my pack, and best practices are always to carry at least 3 sources of light, and even my fourth light failed. I was not in complete darkness. I was in an area, what we refer to as twilight, where there was a little bit of diffused light you could see coming in from the top, but it was dark enough that I could not see my pack, and I knew there's this ledge right next to me that I could potentially toss something down. So thus I sat there in the dark waiting. I sat there thinking and thinking of the people in my life, thinking of my leg, not knowing what's wrong with it. At one point in time, I even started singing 99 bottles of beer on the wall, just to entertain myself. And I stopped because I realized when I got to bottle number 1, it was going to be a little bit too depressing. My biggest fear, though, as I was sitting on there on the ledge, was anticipating tremendous pain that I would be experiencing when help did arrive to shove me up through that hole, knowing how much pain it incurred just trying to use my left leg at all. I was dreading the torture that I was sure awaited me ahead. At one point in time, I started getting very, very sleepy and very, very cold and just sat there shaking. I had one extra little shirt that I took and I balled up like a pillow. And I started leaning over thinking, I'll just close my eyes for a little bit and I'll just sleep for a little bit and I'll feel better. And I got to about a 45-degree angle and some little voice inside my head said, don't you dare fall asleep. You stay awake, you keep thinking, you do what you have to do, but don't you dare fall asleep. Shortly thereafter, I started hearing voices and I thought, oh great, now I'm hallucinating. It was my buddy. He said, I found some strangers on the mountain. They're not with us. We're going to get you out. Okay. Well, sure enough, my buddy had started going down the mountain towards our camp, which was a half-mile away, and just happened to find 3 guys on the mountain who just, a father and 2 sons, who were not cavers and did not have normal cave gear with them. But what they did have in this remote location in the wilderness, they just happened to have a rope, a couple of pulleys, and a full body construction harness, the precise equipment we needed to rescue me out of this hole. The one son came down to me, helped me get in the harness. I was a little concerned about my hair, not so much of it getting messed up or damaged in some way, but more about it potentially becoming entrapped in something that a pulley or whatever. I didn't know anything about rescue equipment at that time, anything they might be putting behind my neck, since there was some attachment point there that the rope was going to. Recall that one of the layers I was wearing on my body happened to have a hood on it. So I took that hood, took it up over my head to help protect my hair and eliminate the risk of anything becoming entrapped in whatever they were attaching to the back of my neck. When the rope finally came down, attached me to the harness, they pulled me out. It took from the point you see here of the ledge waiting to the entrance, which is not that far of a distance, maybe 15, 20 feet, took over 30 minutes to pull me up that stretch because my chest kept getting trapped in that spot where I was injured. Twice we had to compress my chest to the point I couldn't breathe. The father eventually had to scoot down a little bit in there and push my shoulders sideways to create just enough room to pop me up and get me up out of the cave. After several hours since the point of my actual injury, finally I got to outside. However, I still had a long journey ahead to get back home. My rescuers provided me with some food and water at that point in time. We didn't know what was wrong with my leg, if it was broken bones, ligaments, what the issue was, but I did have some long knee pads on me that covered from about the top of my kneecap down to the middle of my shin. We came up with the idea to put them around my knee joint to stabilize the leg. At this point in time, being Colorado in August, of course, it starts sleeting and raining up at over 12,000 feet elevation. So a little bit of challenge to deal with there. Didn't have the right gear to deal with it, but you know, it's Colorado. We've got to keep moving. Camp was a half a mile away, as I mentioned earlier. To get back there, originally my rescuers thought they'd try to carry me. Well, this slope's pretty steep. Tried for a few minutes. It didn't work out very well. One of them even offered to have me ride piggyback style. And I just didn't feel comfortable because if he fell or lost his footing, let alone the exhaustion of physically trying to carry me, it could be dangerous for him and further damage my leg. So I realized I had enough strength with my left thigh to lift up my left leg and crab walk backwards down to camp. So I crab walked combination on my butt using my right leg and my hands and shuffled down over a half mile of distance for 3 hours in rain and sleet to get back to camp. By the time I arrived at camp, at that point in time, I was very, very cold. Hypothermia had certainly set in. I was starting to show signs of shock. My skin was clammy. I was starting to get disoriented. Honestly, my memory is a little fuzzy at this point in time because of the state of shock I was in. But fortunately, we just happened to have an EMT, former EMT, who was part of our caving group, who jumped in and took over as my nurse at that point. She got me all stripped out of all the wet, soggy, soaked clothing I was in, got me into my sleeping bag, worked on getting my vitals stabilized, and after the rain stopped, a decision was made by our group to call out for search and rescue. Fortunately, I did have my cell phone with me, and we did have a signal out in one of the meadows close by. So one of the cavers went out, called search and rescue due to the fact that my vitals were stabilized and we're in wilderness area. At that point in time, it was starting to become dark. Search and rescue made a decision to leave me up on the mountain that night and bring up a horse team in the morning to carry me out. This is a picture of me in the morning, waiting for the search and rescue team to arrive. Now on the horse, they warned us the horse could take me and a small pack with some food and water and a rain poncho, but that was about it. All the rest of my gear would have to be taken down the mountain another way. I had about 60 pounds total of gear. It was a very humbling experience to lay everything out and ask my fellow 23 cavers to please take down pieces of my gear down the mountain for me. And I'm so thankful that everyone pitched in and helped out. Also, on a side fun note, as I'm sitting here waiting for the horse and the cavers have started to backpack down the mountain, this was the first real conversation I had with the man who would later become my husband 5 years later. Some of you know Steve Reams. First time we'd ever really had a conversation sitting there, and he was telling me about when he had to be rescued off a mountain himself when his knee went out, and not to feel so bad. The horse did arrive. Here's a picture of Ure, who was my rescue horse. It was somewhat entertaining getting me up on the horse. They brought Ure up to where I was sitting, and the rescuer said, "Put your foot in and just swing yourself up over the horse." I said, "That's nice. I can't put any weight on my leg. I don't know what's wrong with it." This horse team for the Custer County Search and Rescue, it was a fairly new team with their rescue operation. The horses had only been brought in for body recoveries before. I got to be their very first live patient. So with the help of 4 different people, we figured out how to sort of shove and throw my body up on the horse. The horse was amazing, very patient, and was wonderful on the 3-hour ride down back to the trailhead. 27 hours from the point in time of my injury, I was safely off the mountain. And once again, big shout out and thank you to Custer County Search and Rescue and their awesome horse program. 2 days later, discovered that I had completely torn my left ACL in Spanish Cave. I had surgery 1 month later using my own hamstring from my left leg as a replacement. Was released for caving a few months after that. Started learning about cave rescue in April 2006. I actually planned the logistics for that cave rescue because I reached out to the director of the Colorado Cave Rescue Network at that time and said, "Hey, if I'm going to be caving in these crazy places, I need to learn something about cave rescue. I need to have more knowledge. What can I do to help out?" And he said, "You can help plan an orientation to cave rescue." I thought, great, I'll attend an OCR, I'll learn everything I need to know about cave rescue, and then I'll be good to go. Well, a couple hours into the first morning, I realized, oh shoot, this is only the beginning. There is so much more to learn. So I got inspired, started training, and got ready for attending my first level 1 a year later. Also went back into Spanish Cave a year later, although it was 2 years before I went to the injury site. The more cave rescue training courses I took from NCRC, the more I was hooked, and the more training I pursued, eventually becoming an instructor in 2012. Some things that went really well with my accident. I got really, really lucky that my ACL was torn near an entrance. Even with being torn near an entrance and being able to see light filtering down in, it still was a several-hour extraction process. If my injury had occurred much deeper in the cave, it would have been a much, much more challenging experience. I am also very fortunate that I was caving with others. I know some people like to cave alone. Personally, I recommend that you always have someone with you. An ideal number would be 4 people. So if someone did become injured, someone could stay with the injured person and 2 people could go out for help. I also followed my gut when it said, stay awake, don't fall asleep. As Dr. Iki will talk a little bit more about hypothermia later, if I had fallen asleep and lost consciousness, I would have become a much more severe hypothermic patient, and it would have become a much more challenging situation to get me out. I also got really, really, really lucky that there were strangers in the area who just happened to have the right gear and the right knowledge. The picture here in the center is the father, and on the right are the 2 sons, who were the strangers we found on the mountain in the cave. The father wrote me a letter a year later and told me his side of my accident, the story. I was stunned to find out that about this time, before he found me on the mountain, just for fun, he just happened to also be reading a book on cave rescue called On Call and was curious about caving and cave rescue. Fortunately, we were able to exchange information, stay in touch. This picture was taken in another cave in Colorado called Feels Like I'm Fixing to Die Cave, which I'm grateful I was able to share with them a year after my accident, and then take them down to do some caving in the Guadalupe Mountains as well. Some other lessons learned from my experience. Personal fitness is very important. For caving, you need to find a good balance of strength, cardio, and flexibility. At the point in time of my accident, I was teaching fitness classes 7 days a week. I was very strong on cardio training, but very weak on strength. Since then, I have corrected my fitness routine and come up with a better balance, which with the hopes that if I ever tore my ACL again, that I would have the strength to get out of the situation. Unfortunately, I had the opportunity to test this in March of 2020 when I took a bad fall on a serious ski slope, tore both MCLs and my left ACL simultaneously, as well as some other injuries. Because I had the strength built up from the lessons learned in my accident at Spanish Cave, after conducting my own patient self-assessment, I was able to get up with the help of my ski friends, ski down that slope and get out of the situation. So train for caving. It is very physical. You've got to be in shape for it and find that good balance. Hypothermia, know what it is, know how to deal with it, and hopefully avoid it in the first place. At the time of my accident, I had no personal training in cave rescue. Just some simple things while I was waiting on the ledge, such as taking off my knee pads and putting them under me so I wasn't sitting there laying with direct contact on the rock, could have made a huge significant difference. And I know Dr. Iki will share a lot more information with us later on this evening. Finally, get cave rescue training. If you're going to go cave, take the time to learn about cave rescue. You never know when you may need the knowledge, your friends may need the knowledge, or maybe just some strangers that you come across on a mountain or in a cave someday. So thank you very much for listening to my story. I hope you were entertained a bit and hopefully gained some ideas and were inspired to learn a little bit more about cave rescue. I look forward to hopefully meeting some of you at cave rescue training in person in the future someday. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Marty. We're gonna, I think, yes, let's a little round of applause. I think we're gonna let Bill talk and then have questions for everyone at the end about their experiences doing cave rescues. So I'm gonna transition it over to Gretchen to introduce our next speaker.
Good evening. I'm so glad you're all here because we just listened to a wonderful story about cave rescue from Marty Reams, and now we have another rescue story, and this one is going to be from Bill Frantz. Bill Frantz started caving in 1968 and joined the National Speleological Society, or NSS, in 1969. He has been active in Cave Rescue Foundation projects at Lilburn Cave, the lava beds, and has attended several CRF national expeditions. He is principal investigator for the Lava Beds Photo Monitoring Project and the Lilburn Restoration Project, both in California. He has been principal investigator for the Hurricane Crawl Photo Monitoring Project. He's been active in the San Francisco Bay chapter of the National Speleological Society since 1968, including holding the offices of vice chair and chair. He has extensive cave survey experience on instruments, tape, and keeping book. He has been caving in Europe, Australia, Borneo, Botswana, and China, as well as extensive experience in North America. Bill Frantz has been providing instruction in caving and cave rescue techniques for over 50 years. He has been a National Cave Rescue Commission recognized instructor since 2004 and has taught nationwide. Please help me in welcoming Bill Frantz.
I am delighted to be able to tell you this story because I think it's a fine example of how a group can get itself out of trouble. This SPAR, by the way, stands for Small Party Assisted Rescue, and it's the current name for what we used to call self-rescue or party rescue. And there is a SPAR course that is given by the NCRC that will teach you the techniques that are useful, either if you are a caving party or if you are a search and rescue team that doesn't have a whole lot of resources and still needs to do rescues. In 2007, a group of us from the San Francisco Bay chapter decided to do a after the convention caving trip, and we visited caves in Missouri and Arkansas, And our last cave was going to be, cave was going to be Fitton Cave, which is in Arkansas. The party that went into the cave was 8 cavers. None of us were novices. We'd all caved together for many years. And the ninth one, my wife Perry, stayed out on the surface because we planned to move our camp, and she was going to find a new campsite for us at a campground, and we would come out of the cave and we would go to the campground and we would find her and everything would be wonderful. Well, we had these people in the cave. Matt Covington was our Fitton leader. He was the only one who knew the cave. None of the rest of us had been in the cave. Elizabeth Covington is one of the small passage specialists. I had wilderness first aid, and I was an NCRC instructor. Will Heltzley had wilderness first aid. Shannon Matthew, another small passage specialist. Gail McCoy had NCRC training, and she is a small passage specialist. Jonah Schachner had wilderness first aid, and John Tinsley, who's here this evening, has experience in emergency room and had United States Geological Survey emergency training. Also, a number of the people here had been through a self-rescue course, dry run, that was put together by an organization called the Western Region Training Committee. This is the route that we were planning to take in the cave. We went in the beauty entrance and went through beautiful, beautiful cave for quite a way until we got down to a passage called the 21 Jumps where the accident occurred. Here's the 21 Jumps. It follows the top of the canyon with jumps across the canyon. On jump 16 or 17, I fell into the canyon about 12 feet, landing on a smooth sand floor. And here you can see Jonah doing one of the jumps, so you got an idea of what it's kind of like. When I fell in, I landed on my stomach. The other cavers told me to stop trying to move, and they log rolled me onto my back for an assessment. As part of responding to the emergency, they also dumped out all of the packs to find out what kind of equipment they had available to do something useful. And that's highly recommended anytime you have an incident in a cave where you're going to have to respond to it. The initial assessment showed that I had a slight bruise on my left rib and a tender spot in the back of my head. But the really important thing was, as I tried to move my right shoulder, something in there moved that shouldn't. Didn't really hurt badly, but it was definitely not the way my shoulder had been before I fell. We assumed that the shoulder was broken and treated it that way, by the way. We did a focused spine assessment, which we had learned in the wilderness first aid course. And that turned up that there was no obvious thing wrong with my spine. So being quite knowledgeable about the risks, I said, yeah, I can help you get out of here. So they sandwiched me between Shannon and Elizabeth to keep the three of us warm, which wasn't a bad place to be. This is the route that we had to go from the accident location to the entrance. It would have been much, much longer to go back the way we had come. We were very close to the second entrance. But we had to go, once we got past the round room, we would be in water passage. So we had some obstacles, including the water. The water was waist deep in places. We had about a 25-foot pitch that we had to go up. And then there were crawlways and squeezeways on the other side. So we asked the question, are we going to try to do this ourselves, or are we just going to call for help? And the people with me did a lot of planning here, considering what the contingencies were, what they could do if things didn't work, and so on. So when you're in one of these conditions, you also have to ask, what if we're wrong and can't do it? How are we going to handle those situations? And I admit that the last thing I wanted to do was have a rescue team come in that I had never seen, stuff me in a stretcher, and haul me out of the cave. Probably the wrong thing to think, but that's what I thought. So we ended up with a plan. We sent Elizabeth and Gail and Shannon out to notify the authorities, find Perry, and as a way to protect them, since they were all small people, from getting hypothermia. They went out with Matt, who knew the route, and Will, and they were tasked with getting ropes and harnesses and other vertical equipment so we could deal with the vertical problems on the way out. Matt and Will also came back with a wooden platform from one of the vehicles that Matt used for sleeping on, and we used it to pave a section of the crawlway, which was a very nice thing to come across when we were trying to go through it. We stabilized the injuries. We used two bandanas to improvise a sling for the shoulder injury. And then we took a tight-fitting jacket that I carry as a warm thing to have in the cave and just put it over with the sling up against the stomach, and it's a tight jacket, so it held everything in place and made a very good stabilization for what we thought was a broken shoulder. The other injuries didn't require any stabilization, and so we were set to go. On the trip out, we very quickly were in the water passage, and so of course we had greatly raised our risk of hypothermia, getting all wet. When we got to the drop that we had to go up, we decided that we would do a haul out there, and I taught the diminishing loop technique to Matt, who helped to counterbalance me up the drop. When we got to the crawlways, I could hand and knees crawl, moving one hand forward and then crawling up to catch up with it. But it was faster in many places for me to lie on my back and roll back and forth while I pushed with my feet and Will pulled on my good arm. We met the call-out team at the entrance at about dawn, just enough light to be able to walk up the trail without needing lights. So a quick review of or introduction to the diminishing loop technique. It's one of the techniques where a single person can lift somebody else up a drop, because we're using the weight of the rescuer to raise the patient. The patient is attached to one end of a rope that goes through a pulley at the top, and the rescue climbs the other rope. Then you tether the rescuer and the patient together, so one of them's likely to be heavier than the other and it will be on the bottom, but now you can lift them up. And Jonah tells me that when they were doing this, he was pulling on the rope that Matt was climbing on to help Matt haul me up the pitch. This worked very well, and you got to remember when you get off the top of one of these things that both of you have to be clipped into something before either of you gets off the rope. Otherwise, one or both of you may go to the bottom quickly. Anyway, we got out, and Shannon and Elizabeth had found Perry, who took this picture, and Gail had stayed at the top to act as a communication link because we were in a canyon, and things like cell phones had real problems, so Gail could act as an intermediate communication link. Afterwards, we went to a hospital in Harrison, Arizona, and they poked and prodded at me for an hour or two, and at least 2 or 3 people came up and felt my spine to make sure I was all right, and they never bothered to look at the scratches on my back. We then went to a motel at about noon and rented rooms, and we all crawled into the rooms and went to bed. As we were getting ready to crawl into bed, Perry's cell phone rang. Shannon had posted on a social network that's no longer around called LiveJournal the fact that there had been an accident and that I had been hurt and we were all out and everybody was all right. And the phone rang, and it was our son, who also was a live journalist, and he said, "Mom, what happened to Dad?" So I warn you that news of these things travels very rapidly, and you're not going to be able to get a peaceful night's sleep once you get out, perhaps. There's some observations about how this rescue was handled. The leadership techniques were not standard incident command system. We didn't have a single incident commander. Because we had been working together in caves for years, and because our communications were so good, we were able to pass leadership over to the person who was most experienced in the area that needed leadership. So the people with medical training handled the medical. Matt handled the planning for the obstacles that we would get to. And there was a lot of planning for contingencies and so on. And people did a really good job here. I will point out that the bruise on the head was caused by my helmet bottoming. So I think I've thought ever since this that it's a really poor idea to put a map or your balaclava in your hat, because you're reducing that space that the helmet has to absorb that energy. And after this incident, several of the people who were on the trip got their own training from the NCRC. To give you an idea of how the timing works, we were several hours in the cave before after Matt and Will got back. We were several hours before we actually started moving, as we were getting everything ready. And of course, it took them time to go out and come back in. So the exodus took about 8 hours, I estimate. And that would probably have been about half an hour of caving to go out from that point if we'd all been in good shape. And I will point out, if we had waited for a team to come in, it probably would have taken them considerably longer to move a litter out of there. As I say, we got to the entrance when the call-out team was at the entrance organizing to come in and find out what was going on and plan their rescue. The injury was actually torn shoulder cartilage, which is the cartilage that holds together the collarbone and the scapula. So I still have not done anything to try to repair that. The doctor said that 95% of the people don't do that and are perfectly happy. And since I had full range of motion and strength, I didn't want to do surgery. The lessons learned. Let's try not jumping in caves, maybe. We discovered that we had the basic emergency equipment that when we pulled stuff out of the packs. One of our members remembers an amazing assortment of first aid equipment that popped out of these packs. And of course, one truth of all incidents like this is that what you thought was a horizontal cave has suddenly become a vertical cave. And we did a write-up for American caving accidents, which you can look up if you want to. So I'd like to give thanks to the people who helped me review this presentation, and Kayla, who provided the maps.
Thank you, Bill. That was a great presentation. We have time for some questions. So at this point, you can either put your question in the chat, or you can just unmute yourself and ask it. Bill, if you can stop sharing, that would be great. And then we'll all be able to see each other in the gallery view. So I have a question for you, Bill. Were you ever worried, or what kind of emotions did you feel during your rescue?
I felt a high degree of annoyance at having gotten myself into this situation. But I really wasn't worried about it. I trusted my team. and knew that they could get me out of there. This comes from, having caved with them for a long time. So, and I really didn't want to ride if I could walk.
Yes, the litter rescue certainly takes a lot longer. Plus, you have to wait for the team to get there in the first place and bring the litter.
And consider that they probably got called somewhere between 8 and midnight, and they were at the entrance at dawn. They did a pretty good job of getting that initial call out and people on the scene. They're a competent team.
Mm-hmm. Let's go to Renee's question for Marty. When did the cavers that were still farther into the cave realize that something was wrong?
So nobody else in our caving team realized anything was wrong until I arrived at camp in a state of hypothermia and shock. I did have a walking stick with me that I had left at a lower entrance of the cave, and when they got out, they saw the stick. They just assumed I had forgotten it, went down to camp, curled in their sleeping bags, and went to bed because the weather was so bad. And that was a clue, but lesson learned: if you see a clue like that, maybe follow up and find out what happened to the person that it belongs with, and just don't assume that they're in their tent. Go check. So.
Okay. So here's a question from Frank. Bill and Marty, I'm a former paramedic, but a brand new caver. How does one start training in cave rescue?
Well, I will suggest that you take some NCRC courses. And the orientation for cave rescue is good for new cavers because it doesn't require any vertical techniques. All the rest of the NCRC courses require as a prerequisite a bit of vertical competence. And so you can do your vertical work and then take the rest of the smorgasbord.
Yes, if you go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say I'll follow up as well and agree. Definitely an orientation to cave rescue and OCR is a great way. At the end of my presentation, which I know will be available later on YouTube, there's an email address there. Feel free to contact me directly, and I'd be more than happy to put you in touch with whomever your local regional coordinator is for the National Cave Rescue Commission, so you can maybe learn about where an orientation to cave rescue may be near you, or you can potentially help organize one to make one happen.
Yes, and you also have my email address, and you're more than welcome to email me as well.
Great. If you look on the ncrc.info website, there's a tab that has courses, and you can look at all the different courses that NCRC offers. And then there are also additionally some custom courses that pop up from time to time that can be different than what's listed. Okay, a question from Hector for Bill. You were hurt at your shoulder. Do you need to do some rope ascension on the way out? And also, how could you walk and crawl having that injured shoulder?
Okay, I didn't have to do any rope climbing. I got lifted up with the diminishing loop counterbalance technique. But crawling, my right arm was tightly braced against my body. So crawling, I could quickly lift the left hand and move it forward a little bit, and then kind of crawl to catch up with it. But that wasn't as good a technique as lying on my back, pushing with my feet, and having Jonah pull on the good hand.
It's amazing how you can find some new techniques when the need arises.
I'll make a quick comment here. That climb is normally doesn't require rope, but it does require two good arms. And so while Bill gave his lesson in diminishing rope lifts to Matt, I'd climbed up there and set the anchors and stuff, and everything was thereby all ready to go. But we decided to do the lift because we just didn't think that it was prudent to have somebody as impaired as Bill was try to free climb that.
I will add that they put a harness on me before we started moving out. And I don't think I took a step where somebody wasn't either holding onto the harness or I was on a belay.
Good,
And that
good
included
idea.
the surface.
Melody Pumplin has a question for both of you. In what ways have these experiences been beneficial as a cave rescue instructor?
Well, I guess I'll tackle that one first. First of all, inspiring me
Ladies
to
first.
First of all, inspiring me to become a cave rescue instructor, to try to pay it forward and help others who took the time to gain some knowledge that helped me. But I think a lot of it is helping students remember the whole reason why we're doing cave rescue is because somebody's hurt. Too frequently, I think we get into cave rescue training, we get all geek out over the gear, and we get excited over it, and it's fun stuff. But sometimes we miss the whole point that the whole reason why we're there is somebody's hurt and they need our help, and we forget to focus on what's the injury of the patient and what's the right appropriate way to handle that, as opposed to going and using the fancy tool that we just learned how to use. So it helps keep that in focus and is a great way to connect with others too, by sharing your story.
I would fully agree with Marty on that one. And the other thing is that, for me at least, it showed me the importance of SPAR training as opposed to just the standard levels 1, 2, and 3. If you're a caver and you're doing cave trips, the SPAR will help you get out of trouble on your own. Eventually you will get a problem that's bad enough that you won't be able to handle it. And then you will be calling for a team. But the SPAR does give you a lot of tools for handling your own problems.
Okay, thank you both. We've got another question. From Lindsay Edwards, did these experiences influence what you take or do not take now in post-accident trips with you when you're going caving?
I'm taking about the same things that I had with me in that cave. I had done a fair amount of thinking about what kind of emergency equipment I wanted to have, and I was glad to see that the equipment that I brought was actually kind of the right stuff.
Mm-hmm. I'd say, oh yes, it has changed dramatically what I've brought. I definitely take more of a risk-based approach based on what the environment I'm going into and thinking about, if something goes wrong, what might I need extra? You know, an extra layer or two of clothing. A small lightweight foam pad can be awesome. You know, liner in a pack, taking that out and using that from a hypothermia perspective. If there's vertical involved, I'm always going to have a couple of pulleys and some beaners, a little extra gear. I may not carry it all individually, but I'll carry a pulley. I'll have 1 or 2 other friends carry a piece of gear. So between all of us, if we're all carrying just a few ounces of extra gear, we can pull that gear together and we can create a lot of different things to solve different challenges to get the patient out. I have found it interesting that when I started my cave rescue education journey, my pack got heavier and heavier and heavier as I was taking more and more stuff, more and more gear. And then as I got more and more cave rescue knowledge, now my pack has started to get lighter and lighter and lighter, because now I'm learning more in my head of what I can do in tools and how I can use things, and bringing gear that can be used for multi-purposes and multi-ways. So it's an evolutionary process that's always changing.
Yeah,
Well, I think Marty froze up. We need to take a little break right now anyway. And thank you again, Marty and Bill, for your excellent talks. Oh, really appreciate those. We're going to take a 5-minute break right now and then come back at the top of the hour for Dr. Brian Ickes' talk about hypothermia. So go ahead and take a break if you'd like. If you'd like to hang out and just chat, you are welcome to do that. And we are going to take a little pause here